All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a deep dive into Spencer Johnson's Who Moved My Cheese. We've had a ton of requests for this one.
Yeah, it seems like this book really struck a chord with a lot of people.
Absolutely. And for good reason. It's a deceptively simple story with some really powerful lessons about how to navigate change.
And it's something we could all relate to, right? Change is a constant in life, whether we like it or not.
Exactly. So, for those who haven't read the book, it's this fable about, well, four characters running around a maze looking for cheese.
And the cheese is a metaphor, of course.
Yeah, it represents whatever it is we're striving for in life: success, happiness, you name it.
Right. And the maze itself represents the different environments we find ourselves in: work, relationships, even just life in general.
Okay, so we've got these four characters: Sniff, Scurry, Hem, and Haw. And they all react differently when the cheese they've been relying on suddenly disappears.
And it's those different reactions that provide some really valuable insights into how we deal with change.
It's like each character represents a different part of ourselves, right?
Exactly. Like, think about Sniff and Scurry, the little mice.
Hmm.
They're always on the move, always sniffing out new cheese sources.
They're not just sitting around waiting for the cheese to come to them.
No, they're proactive, they anticipate change, and they adapt quickly.
Now, contrast that with Hem and Haw, the little people. They're much more resistant to change.
They get comfortable with their current cheese supply, and they freak out when it disappears.
And they spend a lot of time complaining and wishing things would go back to the way they were.
Which, of course, never
Oh,
happens.
right. And that's the first big lesson of the book, isn't it? Change happens. Be ready for it.
Exactly. And I think the key takeaway there is to become more like Sniff and Scurry,
Mm.
to develop that proactive mindset.
So, how do we do that? I mean, it's easy to say be more proactive, but what does that actually look like in our day-to-day lives?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. Being aware of the changes that are happening around us, the trends in our industry, the shifts in the economy,
Mm.
even the changes in our own personal lives.
So, it's about being more attuned to our environment.
Yeah. And then it's about being willing to adapt to those changes, to let go of the old cheese and embrace the new.
Which, let's be honest, is often easier said than done. We humans are creatures of habit. We like routine, we like familiarity.
We do. But the thing is, change is inevitable. And the more resistant we are to it, the more difficult it becomes.
I think that's why this book resonates with so many people. It's like a little roadmap for navigating change in a world that's constantly shifting.
Absolutely. And it's not just about external changes either. It's also about the changes that happen within ourselves. Our own fears, our limiting beliefs, those can be the biggest obstacles in the maze.
That's a great point, and I think that's something we'll explore further as we dive deeper into the book.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
Definitely. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's circle back to that first lesson for a moment. Change happens. Be ready for it. How can we as individuals better prepare ourselves for the inevitable changes that life throws our way?
Well, like we said, it starts with awareness, paying attention to the signs of change. But it's also about developing a certain mindset, a mindset of flexibility, adaptability, and resilience.
It's like building up our change muscles, so to speak.
Exactly. Because the stronger those muscles are, the better equipped we'll be to handle whatever changes come our way.
And I think that's where the second lesson of the book comes in, right? Adapt quickly, don't overthink.
Yeah, that's a big one. Because it's so easy to get stuck in our heads when change happens. We start overthinking, overanalyzing, and we end up paralyzing ourselves with indecision.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like analysis paralysis.
Exactly. But Sniff and Scurry, they don't waste time overthinking things. They see the cheese is gone, and they immediately start looking for new cheese.
They're action-oriented.
Exactly. And that's what we need to be too. When change happens, we need to be able to assess the situation quickly and then take action.
But isn't there a danger in acting too impulsively? I mean, sometimes it's good to take a step back and think things through, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely a balance to be struck. We don't want to be reckless, but we also don't want to get bogged down in endless analysis.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between thoughtful consideration and decisive action.
Right. It's about being able to think on our feet and make adjustments as needed. Because the truth is, the longer we wait, the more opportunities we miss.
I think that's a really important point because it's easy to get stuck in that what if mode. What if I make the wrong decision? What if I fail?
But the thing is, even if we make a mistake, we can always learn from it and course correct. The important thing is to keep moving forward.
Okay, so we've talked about being aware of change and adapting quickly, but what about those times when change feels really scary? when we're afraid of the unknown, afraid of what might happen if we step outside our comfort zone.
Well, that's where the third lesson of the book comes in, right?
Fear can trap you, but it's an illusion.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that's really resonated with me personally. Because I think we all experience fear when faced with change. It's natural.
Absolutely. But the key is to not let that fear control us.
Right. Because fear can be so paralyzing. It can keep us stuck in situations that are no longer serving us.
I'm thinking about Ha here. He's terrified of venturing out into the maze to look for new cheese. He's afraid of getting lost, afraid of what he might encounter.
And for a while, that fear keeps him trapped at the old cheese station, even though there's no cheese left.
He's clinging to the past, even though it's no longer serving him.
Exactly. And that's something I think we can all relate to. We all have those moments when we're afraid to let go of something, even when we know it's time to move on.
So how do we overcome that fear? How do we break free from that feeling of being trapped?
Well, I think the first step is to acknowledge the fear, to recognize that it's there.
Because often we try to pretend it's not there. We try to push it down and ignore it.
We do. But the thing is, the more we try to ignore it, the bigger it gets.
So we need to bring it out into the open.
Exactly. And then we need to challenge it, to ask ourselves, what am I really afraid of?
And often when we really examine our fears, we realize that they're not as rational as we thought they were.
Right. We might be afraid of failing, but what does failure really mean? What's the worst that could happen?
And often the worst that could happen is not nearly as bad as we imagine it to be.
Exactly. So once we've challenged our fears and put them into perspective, we can start to take action.
We can start to move forward, even if we're still a little bit scared.
Right. Because courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about acting in spite of fear.
I think that's a really important distinction, because it means that we don't have to wait until we're completely fearless to start making changes.
Exactly. We can start taking those small steps outside our comfort zone, even if our hearts are pounding and our palms are sweating.
Because the more we do it, the easier it gets.
Right. And eventually we'll start to see that the fear was just an illusion, that the things we were so afraid of weren't really that scary after all.
And that's when we can really start to embrace change and see it as an opportunity for growth and adventure.
Exactly. And that's what this book is all about, isn't it? Helping us to see change not as something to be feared, but as something to be embraced.
Absolutely. And I think that's a message that's more relevant than ever in today's world, because change is happening faster than ever before.
It is. And the only way to thrive in this constantly changing world is to learn to adapt and evolve along with it.
Which is exactly what Who Moved My Cheese
Yeah.
teaches us how to do. It's like we were saying before, change, it's not always external, is it?
No, not at all.
Sometimes the biggest changes are the ones that are happening inside of us.
Right. Our own beliefs and our mindsets and even our fears.
That's a great segue into the next lesson from the book, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Let go of the past, move with the cheese.
Yeah. This one's really powerful.
It is, and it's so easy to get stuck in the past, to keep clinging to the way things used to be.
Especially when those things were comfortable, or
Hmm.
familiar.
Right, like we talked about those little people, Hem and Haw.
Yeah, they really illustrate this lesson.
They spend so much time dwelling on what they've lost, that old cheese.
And they're afraid to let go, to move on.
Even though it's clear that the old cheese is gone for good.
It's like they're holding on to this hope that it's going to come back.
But it never does it?
Nope. And the longer they wait, the more they suffer.
It's like they're stuck in this loop of negativity.
Exactly. And that negativity can be so draining.
It can really sap our energy and prevent us from moving forward.
It's like carrying around a heavy weight.
So how do we break free from that weight of the past? How do we let go and move on?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Being aware of what we're holding on to.
Right. Like, what are those old beliefs, those old habits,
Yeah.
those old relationships even, that are no longer serving us?
And once we've identified those things,
Then we can start to let them go.
which can be really tough, I know.
It can be, but it's so liberating.
It is. It's like taking a deep breath of fresh air.
And it opens up space for new possibilities.
I think it's important to point out here that letting go doesn't mean forgetting.
No, of course not.
It just means releasing the emotional attachment we have to the past.
It's about acknowledging the past, learning from it.
And then moving on.
Exactly.
So we've talked about letting go of the past.
Moving with the cheese.
But what does that actually look like in practice? I mean, how do we move with the cheese when we don't even know where the cheese is?
That's a great question.
Is it? I wasn't sure.
It is, because it gets to the heart of this whole idea of adaptability.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah, so like, think about Sniff and Scurry again.
Always sniffing out that new cheese.
Exactly. They don't know where the new cheese is either, but
Yeah.
they're not afraid to go looking for it.
They're curious.
They're open to new experiences.
And they're not afraid to take risks.
And that's what we need to do too.
Be more like Sniff and Scurry.
Yeah, we need to be willing to explore,
To try new things.
to step outside of our comfort zones.
Because that's where the new cheese is often found.
It is, but I think there's another important aspect to this whole idea of moving with the cheese.
Oh, what's that?
Enjoying the journey.
Oh, yeah, I remember that from the book.
Yeah, so like when Ha finally starts to let go of the past.
He begins to realize that the journey itself can be enjoyable.
Exactly. He starts to appreciate the new sights and sounds.
The new smells, even.
He meets new characters along the way.
And he learns and grows from those experiences.
And I think that's something we can all do.
Find a way to enjoy the journey of change, even when it's challenging.
Because it's in those challenges that we often discover our greatest strengths.
That's such a great point.
And it's something I think we often forget. You know, we get so focused on the destination.
The new cheese.
Yeah, that we forget to enjoy the ride.
So maybe the key is to shift our perspective a bit.
To see change not as something to be endured, but as an adventure to be embraced.
And I think that brings us to the final lesson from the book, right?
Enjoy change.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as you think.
Ooh, I like that one.
Me too.
It's so simple, yet so profound.
It is, and I think it really encapsulates the whole message of the book.
Change can be a good thing
It can be, if we let it.
if we open ourselves up to the possibilities.
To the new experiences.
To the new cheese.
Exactly. And I think that's a message that's more relevant than ever in today's world.
Absolutely, because change is happening all around us.
At an unprecedented pace.
And the only way to keep up
To thrive, even.
is to learn to embrace change,
To enjoy the ride.
to move with the cheese. Okay, so we've spent all this time talking about change, about Sniff and Scurry and hem and haw.
that cheese.
But how do we actually apply all of these lessons in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, because it's one thing to read about these concepts, but it's another thing entirely to actually put them into practice.
Right, and I think that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
It is, and I think it can be really overwhelming, to think about all the changes that are happening in the world,
Yeah.
to try to figure out how to adapt to all of them.
It's a lot.
It is, so maybe we can break it down a bit.
Sure.
Like, what are some practical steps that we can take to become more like Sniff and Scurry?
Okay, so first things first. I think it's important to develop a sense of awareness.
Awareness of what?
Awareness of the changes that are happening around you.
Okay, so like paying attention to the news.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Keeping up with industry trends.
Right, but it's also about being aware of the changes that are happening within yourself.
Like what?
Like your own
Oh.
values, your goals, your priorities.
I see.
Because those things can change over time too.
They do.
And it's important to be aware of those changes so that you can adapt accordingly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So once you've developed a sense of awareness,
Then what?
then it's about taking action.
But what kind of action?
Well, it depends on the specific change that you're facing.
Okay.
But in general, I think it's about being willing to step outside of your comfort zone,
To try new things.
to experiment.
To take risks.
Exactly.
Because you never know what you might discover.
Right. And that's the exciting part, isn't it?
It is. It's like an adventure.
It is. And like any adventure, there will be challenges along the way.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But that's okay.
It is.
Yeah, because it's through those challenges that we learn and grow.
Oh, like hem and haw.
Yeah, they eventually learned that the only way to find new cheese was to face their fears and venture out into the maze.
And they did eventually find new cheese, didn't they?
They did.
And it was even better than the old cheese.
It was.
So I guess the takeaway here is that change can be a good thing
It can be, if we let it,
if we embrace it.
if we move with the cheese.
Exactly. And I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah, I think so too.
So to all of our listeners out there who are facing change in their own lives,
Remember the lessons of Who Moved My Cheese.
be aware.
Be adaptable.
Be courageous.
And most importantly, enjoy the journey.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.